Welcome to Jump into Java. My name is Donna Martin and I'll be your instructor. In this particular module, what we basically want to do is get started with Java. So we're going to start by looking at a working piece of Java code, and we're specifically going to be covering the syntax of the language so you can get a feel for how to write your own code. We'll be talking about how to compile and run a Java program, and we're going to start doing that by using some of the online compilers, online Java compilers. Eventually we'll install our own Java runtime environment, but we want to get up and running quickly here, so we're going to take advantage of some of the online Java compilers as the starting point. Since Java is an object-oriented language, we're going to need to talk about what that means. And part of the new words we're going to be learning are these things called methods and classes. A method, if you're used to other programming languages, you might have heard the term functions before, so that's Java's flavor of a function. And then we're also going to talk about classes, which is a basic part of object-oriented programming. But let's get started by looking at Java and what the code looks like so we can just get started doing our thing here. So here's an online Java compiler called JDoodle. It's at www.jdoodle.com, and we're going to use it, and that way we don't have to take the time to do an install, which we'll be doing later. I wanted to pick a couple sites that have been around for a while to help us get started. This particular one has ads on the left and the right of the area where we're going to enter our code. So for now I've covered those up with these yellow rectangles that you see. But if you go to this site and use this online compiler, you're going to see ads show up, which is very common in a lot of the free sites. But what I'm going to do right now for our video is go ahead and reduce the size of the viewing area so we don't have to worry about those ads showing up. So the code that you see here is the sample code that JDoodle has put up. So we're just going to start with it. We're going to kind of take advantage of their generosity. And what you see here first is this statement that says public class my class. That is right here. Now this is a standard way to start a Java program. It turns out that everything in Java is going to be on or in a class. So the very first thing that you're going to see in a Java program is some sort of class definition. And this particular class is called my class. Give me whatever name you want it to be, and we're going to be going over the rules for naming things as we get further into Java. But basically you can see that we use upper and lower case, we don't use spaces, that type of thing. Now this is the name of the class. It is what's called a public class, which you see here by this particular statement that says public. And it is a class. That's what it is, and this is what type of class it is. There are public classes that everybody can see, and you need at least one public class in your program so that it can do something. So public just is a matter of who can see it. We'll be going through that in more detail as we go along as well. But again, the main thing that we're interested in here is this is almost always going to be the first line, something similar to this. The name of the class is up to you. We'll see later on that typically the name of the class is also the name of your program file on your system. Now since we're using an online compiler, that's not important to us. We have that first line, public class, and some name, and then we have this opening curly brace right here. So that's going to start off this particular class. So we're going to be using the braces as we go along, or curly bracket, or whatever you want to call it. Alright, so that's the first thing that's going to happen. And you'll notice the closing brace is down here at the end of the program. So this is the opening one, and then this is the closing one down here. So inside this Java class, this my class, we have these other statements right here. And you'll see that they also have an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. So everything between this opening and this closing is part of this thing called main. So the name of this particular section of code is called main. Well, in Java, main is our main program. We need to have at least one main area, and in Java it's called a method. If you're used to other languages, you might be thinking it's a function, and in Java, those are methods. So main is a method that is declared, and it's receiving some arguments. It's receiving some things from the outside world. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. We have main here, and that is a word that you're going to want to use. It's lowercase like this, and you need at least one of these because that tells your program where to start and what to do. Then we have what's happening here is information is being passed into main. If you see this opening curly brace, or I'm sorry, opening parentheses, that's a very common way in programming languages to indicate information that's being passed in to this particular method. So what's being passed in is a variable, and it has the name args. And it's an array. That's what square brackets mean. Anytime you see square brackets, that means that we're talking about an array. Oops, I'm not doing very good with my writing. Let's try that again. That means that we're talking about an array. So anytime you see square brackets, that's what that means, is an array. And so this particular thing is an array of strings, and the name of it is ARGS. That is a very common name for things that are coming in from the user on the keyboard. You'll see that in many programming languages. They'll have args, or you may see argv, or something along those lines. All right, so we have this going on with our main function, and then we have main, which is expecting an argument called args, which is an array of strings. All right, now we have this information out here, kind of similar to what we had when we were dealing with my class, public, static, void. We're going to talk about these in more detail, but as we already mentioned, public means it's a method that everybody can see. That's very important for your main program. You want it to be public. It is void. That means that it doesn't return anything. So there's no return value from this particular program or this particular method. And then static we'll talk about as we get further into this. All right, so that's the definition of our main method, and we need to have one of these in every Java program. Now in this particular main method, we're going to do some adding, and then we're going to print something out. I'm only going to go over this part briefly because we'll be covering it in great detail as we go into variables and all of that. But here basically we're creating two variables, x and y. They're both integers, and in Java the integer data type is int, and we're initializing them to have some initial values. So x gets assigned 10 and y gets assigned 25. Then we also create a variable called z, which we're going to take the values of x and y and add them up and then store them in z here. The way that this is going to work is after we do this math, we would like to tell the user what the answer is. So we want to print this thing, the sum of x and y equals, and then some value. Okay, so the way that this statement is working is it's taking this string, this thing that you see within these little quote marks, the sum of x plus y equals, and then it's adding this other string, whatever is in z, which is 35, to that, and then it's going to print that out. Now the way that it prints in Java is we use this call here, system.out.println, or some people will say println, but basically this is a method in a system library. So this has already been created for us. It's a standard Java system library that we're going to be using. And so we call println, and it prints this information followed by a carriage return. So it prints one line of code for us, or one line of output for us. And it is a system library method, and we're dealing with printing it to standard out. So it's system.out. We'll see later on how we use standard in to read things. So this is their standard program. We have the class definition, and then we have the main method. So if we scroll down and look at JDoodle, we'll see how to run this. We're not passing anything into our program. We'll learn how to do that later. If we type something here in this particular box, it would be passed in to the ARGS variable. But we're not going to worry about that because we're not using anything. s is not, args is not used in our main method anywhere. So we're going to leave that blank. And then if we were to ask the user some questions, this particular online compiler has a place for us to put the answer. So if I was asking them for X and Y, we would type in the answers in this particular box here. But again, we're not going to worry about that because we're not asking the user for X and Y, we're just setting it in the program. So finally, if we scroll further down, we will see the execute button. Now we haven't made any changes, so there shouldn't be any syntax errors. So let's see what happens if we tell it to execute JDoodle's sample code. Let's execute this, and since we didn't change anything, it should run just fine. So we're going to press on the execute button, and it's going to refresh our area. So let me scroll down. Here's the program that we didn't change. And then down here is the result. Sum of x plus y equals 35. And again, all that's happening here is it is printing the result of this string right here, the system.out.println. So println is the method, system is the class in the core library that Java is using. So that is one sample piece of Java code. Now we're going to go through all of these things in more detail, but I just wanted you to start by seeing a real piece of code, and then we're going to start talking about, okay, now what exactly was happening with the system call, and what's the args, and what do we mean by public static void? But I wanted you to see it so you can see what Java looks like. I want to show you one more online Java compiler just from the point of view that the web changes all the time. I don't want to just give you one option and then for some reason that option disappears. So another option for an online compiler is this rextester.com/run code. If you just go to rextester.com, you'll see an option to run code, and that's where you want to go for doing this online compiler. So the first thing you're going to find is that this particular compiler environment has lots and lots of languages. We want to select Java. I believe C# is the default, but we want to come into the drop down and select Java, and then just like the other one, it's going to have a sample piece of code for us. Now this import we haven't talked about yet. I'm going to delete that because we don't need it for our simple program. But this is kind of like what we saw before. The only difference is, if you notice in the very first line here, it says class rextester, whereas before we had public static class my class. And in this particular one, the way that the online Java compiler is set up is it tells you right here that the main method, remember every program has to have one, every Java program, the main method has to be in a specific class called rextester. So that's just the way this particular compiler is set up. So you want to take advantage of that. So we put rextester as the name of the class, and that's already built in for you. Here's your main. This main looks exactly like the main we saw before. And you're almost always going to see your main method declared this way. Main receives a string array of args, and it's a public static void. And then there's the opening and the close curly brace, and then we have the print line call in the system class to standard out to say hello world. So very similar to what we had before. Now if we scroll down here, we have these buttons on the bottom. You can actually share your code, but we're just going to run it. When we press run, it says it's working, and then you see hello world down there at the bottom, right there. So that's the output from that particular program. So I just wanted you to have that second option there. And just so you know, hello world is the standard traditional first program that you learn when you're learning different programming languages. So there you go. Thank you for joining me for this module where we took a quick peek at a couple pieces of Java code. I hope you'll continue on as we learn more and more about this language and you become a proficient, effective Java programmer. Thank you again.